welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. This is Jessica. I am your host today, and I am here with the author of The Hunter's Daughter. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what this book is about?
Hi, I'm Nicola Solvinic, and this is my book, The Hunter's Daughter. I just actually got a box of them the other day, so these are fresh from the crate. And the book is about the secret daughter of a notorious serial killer, and she's got to catch his copycat using the tricks that her father taught her in the forest long ago. So that's my elevator pitch for the book.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And it brought together just sort of a lot of elements, I think, that draw people in. You have the whole angle that Anna was at one point, she was very close with her father. And you find out more about her life after a traumatic event that happens that sort of opens up the can of worms that is her mind, which is a whole other story altogether. But she is a cop, and she is determined to be a good cop. And then everything kind of comes crashing down around her when something happens, and her past catches up with her. I think that the whole angle of her father as being like this forest dwelling type person was really interesting. And there's so many things I want to ask you about, but I suppose we could just kind of start with, where did you get the idea for this story?
It was just an idea that I kind of wanted to play with. I can't really say where it came from. It just it was like one of those download moments where I thought, I'm just going to experiment with something. And the book kind of wrote itself. And that's not been the case I've got like some other books that are in shoeboxes under my bed that were like pulling teeth and were a struggle to write, and and they're never going to see the light of day because they're that bad. And yeah. And this book wasn't like that. It was just it felt very intimate writing it, and it just felt like being in that close first person point of view with an unreliable narrator was a lot of fun.
Without a doubt, it was very interesting to read, and I always love it when authors tell me that these books sort of write themselves, because those are usually the wildest rides. Uh, there's a lot of things in here, just, about relationships between parents and children, and, what we think we remember versus what actually happened. And I think, like, another thing I neglected to say earlier was there's almost like a true crime angle to this as well. uh the idea of the Forest Strangler, which is Anna's dad, were there any cases that you sort of based him on when you started writing the book?
Actually, no. The Forest Strangler is kind of my own creation. I wanted to have the idea of the kind of a mashup between the gruesomeness of a line of serial killings, but also a little bit of the dreaminess and the haziness of a fairy tale. And what the Forest Strangler does is he kills women of a certain type, but then he arranges them in the forest in a very elaborate staging process. He has a lot of time with them, and he is able to like put stones over their eyes and wreaths of flowers in their hair and create these fantastic bouquets for them to hold. And this is his art. And to my knowledge, I haven't, I'm not aware of anybody else that's done anything like that, which is a good thing. We do not need weirdos in the world running around in the woods, abducting people, and then, yeah.
One thing I did find really interesting about him, though, is he has this sort of belief system, which is in this I believe, a Slavic forest god as well. There's like a little mythology uh, in the book that I was not expecting. How did that whole angle come up?
Well, I've read for several years about, Slavic mythology, and there was a book that I read several years ago that was about a guy's kind of mystical explorations in Eastern Europe. And one of the figures in Slavic mythology who I think is interesting is Veles. He is kind of the god of the earth and the god of the underworld. And he's kind of analogous in some ways to Hades, but in other ways not. He's kind of his own uh, creature. And a lot of the representations that I've seen of him in art are this antlered, man of the forest, kind of this green man, man of the woods type thing. And so the Forest Strangler in my story had spent some time in Eastern Europe, and we don't really know what happened, but we know he had kind of contact with this entity, whether this was in his own head or whether this was a real entity he came into contact with. And he brought that back with him when he returned to the States and fixated kind of his crimes around making offerings to this forest god, as Anna calls him.
There were a few other things that came up while I was reading the story, and I had to go back and sort of research them a little bit. Uh, the Lissa mutation.
Total fiction.
Yeah, I was like, I hope it's not too much of a spoiler to ask you about because it felt like a very real thing. And I had to figure, I was like, does this exist? Because there's so much in biology that we don't know about, and I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because it's fairly early on. You find out somebody is obviously a copycat killer of the Forest Strangler, and they seem to have, what's left of their genetic, their DNA shows that they have this mutation, which is extremely rare and would connect them to the Forest Strangler. Uh, yeah, I was curious, where obviously I did a little research about the name and where it all came from. But I liked that little angle about it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was just kind of a total fiction thing, but I wanted my protagonist to kind of struggle in a concrete way with have I inherited my father's evil? Whether it's a biologic evil, a spiritual evil, whatever it is. Am I going to turn out to be like my dad because, maybe this is genetically transmissible, And yeah, I just, that just came just totally out of the ether, and there's nothing like that in the real world, thank goodness.
But where did you get the name from? That's what I want to know.
Okay, if I remember correctly, I think that rabies viruses are Lissa viruses, which you probably saw. And then there's also a mythological connection to that as well.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, and I think that that's like one of the things that made this story just, while it has all of these wild, fantastical connections, it it really made it feel very grounded because that is very much how things are named. And I spent way too much time trying to convince myself that the Lissa mutation was a real thing, which bad librarian, I should have just been like, yeah, no, nothing's coming up. There is no deep connection. But I just wanted to give you props for that.
Thank you. No, I mean, you could have just emailed me and asked me, you know, but yeah, I get that. Sometimes, when I'm in a book, I like to, do some research and think, is this real? Is this not? And part of what I wanted to do with this book, and it's sort of what they used to do in the X-Files many years ago, that there's a scientific explanation for things, possibly, or maybe there's a supernatural explanation. And I really want the reader to be able to decide for themselves, what happened.
Another thing you sort of explore is, I guess, sort of just how being so close to something like Anna was, affects how you relate and connect with everybody around you. Where you did mention that the story was, it really just kind of wrote itself. Did Anna come first as the protagonist, or did the setting and story draw itself around her?
I think Anna came first. I was interested in exploring the idea of, you know, and anytime there's a murder, there are all these huge ripples, and everyone's life has changed, not just the victim, not just the murderer, it's the victim's family and everybody around. And I wanted her to feel that, in a really, really concrete way. As far as, how she interacts with people, I think that she tends to initially be very cerebral. She's very much in her head, and she's like, okay, I'm a public servant. I'm here to serve. I'm here to do the right thing. And I only believe in what I can, experience with my own senses. But as the story goes on, I think she really kind of slips into a more a less grounded, more intuitive way of being. Like, she draws connections to elements of the case that aren't supported by evidence, that she just kind of makes these leaps. And, it's kind of forced to go along with it in order to try to catch the killer, which I thought was kind of interesting because it's really kind of pushing her out of her comfort zone and into a place where everybody would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And she has this connection, kind of, sort of, with a flame named Nick,
Mhm.
uh, who shows up again earlier in the story. Um, their relationship, did it change at all while you were writing the story?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted Nick to be her connection to humanity as she's kind of like losing her grip on it as the story progresses. He's kind of her touchstone. He is, a constant in her life. He is grounded. He is a good guy. He, works in an ER, and his whole life purpose is to be helping people. So I think as she's going through the events of the story and the trauma of the story and, trying to fix the past and the present and the future, Nick is kind of a really grounding influence for her until he's not.
Right. Are you like a fan yourself? Like, when you read, is this your genre, or are you like, do you prefer something very different when you're consuming your own enjoyment reading?
I love reading in all kinds of different genres. I love Jennifer McMahon. I love Lauren Nossett, Catherine McKenzie, Karen Dion. I love, reading in that genre, but I also really love reading in fantasy genres. Like Circe is one of my all-time favorite books. I very rarely reread books, but I have reread that one two or three times because, I just love seeing the mythological underpinning.
I could definitely see elements of mythological underpinnings in the way that you write as well. Would you ever, do you think, write in that genre?
Oh, I would love to. I would love to, and I really love the trend that we have now. There are more and more books coming out. My TBR stack is just absolutely huge of, stories told from the point of view of famous mythological women. Like, I've got one about Medusa that's in my TBR stack that I cannot wait. You know, but yeah, I would love to branch out and play with that a little bit sometime.
So, what was the most challenging part of writing The Hunter's Daughter?
Um, Initially, it was a story that I kind of wrote for myself. And I thought, well, I don't know if anybody will see it. Maybe I'll self-publish it, and, maybe a few dozen people might see it. But it was just kind of something that I wrote over summer one time, just because I don't know. Like I said, the book kind of wrote itself, and it was just, I had this germ of an idea of, what about, that we have all these far-reaching effects of awful crimes, and, what would it be like if you were, the child of somebody who had done something really, really terrible? How do you get away from it? How do you make sense of it? How do you lead the rest of your life? Do you separate yourself from it? Um, and then, the setting, of course, is a character of its own. And I grew up in a place very similar to that, you know, uh, kind of in a rural area with all these serpentine rivers, and you can hear the cicadas in the summer. So that I think became a character, and then just kind of watching the two of them interact was a lot of fun.
So are you working on anything else after this book?
Well, I am not quite done with Anna, so I am working on a sequel book right now. I kind of felt like I really wanted a couple hundred more pages, but that would not have been fair to the reader, because that would have been a really, really, really. So I'm playing around with some ideas about that, because I think that Anna is an evolving character. I don't think that she finished her evolution at the beginning of that book, and I'm kind of curious to see where it goes, and I hope other people are curious too.
I know I'm definitely curious. I'm really happy to have gotten to speak to you today. When is this book available?
It is going to be out May 14th at your favorite book retailer, and it is The Hunter's Daughter.
Very good. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. This was Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. Our guest was,
Nicola Solvinic.
and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.